Hey guys, Candice Malcolm here. We are live. This is a special edition of the Candice Malcolm Show. And I had to come on live. I have to talk about this crazy story that has just broken. According to Joe Wormington over at the Toronto Sun, Don Cherry has been fired. Don Cherry is finished, I guess, after what happened during the broadcast Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday night. By now, I'm sure you've seen it. Don Cherry went on one of his sort of typical standard rants that he goes on. And this time, the source of what he was talking about were people not wearing a poppy. So Don Cherry sort of goes off about people who aren't wearing the poppy. And, you know, Ron MacLean's sitting there nodding along. He's making a lot of sense. Don Cherry just going off the way he does. And suddenly, the left catches on, social media goes crazy, and we see what we've seen so many times in Canada and the US, across the Western world, which is just a sort of absolute hysteria, like a moral panic from the left. So it's all about who can virtue signal the loudest, who can jump up on a soapbox and condemn Don Cherry the loudest. And unfortunately, this has led Sportsnet, who runs the show, apparently, to say enough is enough, Don Cherry is gone. Here it is, Sportsnet confirms Don Cherry is immediately stepping down. He's immediately stepping down. Why? Well, basically because a whole bunch of people on social media, people with bad intentions, people looking at this situation in bad faith, decided about immigrants. Now, maybe he was specifically talking about immigrants, and that irked him, and so he said, look, it's Remembrance Day. When you come to Canada, you gotta wear the poppy. Okay, this is Don Cherry in a nutshell. He's no nonsense. He's not politically correct. I listened to the speech. I listened to the segment over and over again because it really didn't dawn on me at first that he was actually talking about immigrants. I had one of the writers at True North write up a transcript of what he says. I'm going to read it because, again, he's literally talking about people in downtown Toronto who are not wearing a poppy. So he says, I live in Mississauga. I was talking to a veteran. I said, I'm not going to run the poppy thing anymore because what's the sense? I live in Mississauga. Nobody wears them. Very few people wear poppies. Downtown Toronto, forget it. Downtown Toronto, no one wears a poppy. And I'm not going to waste my time. He says, wait a minute. How about running it for the people who buy them? Now, you go to the small cities. You people love, they come here, whatever it is. They love our way of life. You love our milk and honey. At least you could pay a couple bucks for a poppy or something like that. Okay, fine. Maybe he's talking about immigrants. Maybe he's talking about people who are in downtown Toronto. Like when I first read it, I honestly thought, he's talking about downtown Toronto. He's talking about people who don't show their appreciation for the veterans. It's Remembrance Day, okay? And let me just say, I've been watching Don Cherry since I was a little kid. I was never a huge Don Cherry fan, mostly because I'm a Vancouver Canuck fan, and I always thought he was super biased towards the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I didn't like the Maple Leafs growing up. Regardless, Don Cherry is an institution in Canada. He is a cherished icon. He's a national hero, and he says it like it is, and you get what you see with him. That's exactly what you expect. You don't expect him to be cowering to leftist political correct sources. So he said it like it was. Not enough people wear a poppy. I completely agree. I'm in Toronto, walking down the streets. It's kind of sad that people aren't wearing a poppy. When I think about the sacrifices that people make, when I think about my own ancestors, I have a great-grandfather who was killed. He was actually killed in the First World War by a sniper in Belgium, and part of the story of Flanders Field is after this gruesome battle, the poppies grew in this field. That was actually one of the fields where my great-grandfather was killed. So I have a special connection to that story, but still, all Canadians, regardless of whether or not it was your ancestors that were fighting for Canada and fighting for freedom, this is the one day a year where we stop and we show our support for people who have made sacrifices so that we can have a free society and so that we can live these free lives. And okay, fine, Don Cherry's not the most eloquent speaker. Maybe he was talking about young people who don't pay enough respect to the troops or don't pay enough attention to how we became free in our society. Maybe he was talking about newcomers. Regardless, he made a point that was more people should support the veterans, more people should support the troops. And really that's innocuous. That's something that all Canadians should rally behind, but instead we have this outrage culture, this moral panic that happens where the cancel culture bullies essentially say, no, 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 we've identified someone who thinks differently than we do, who has a different way of thinking, and who says something that you can be offended by. And so instead of, being kind or being, taking the good message from what Don Cherry said, they find the most malicious way to take that message. They find the most malicious message from that, which is Don Cherry is a bigot, Don Cherry is racist, he must hate immigrants, because let's misconstrue what he was saying, to make it seem like he was talking about all immigrants. And that was the reaction. The reaction that we saw online, through the mainstream media, through all of these virtue signaling blowhards, as far as I'm concerned, who are just, taking the moment in order to make themselves feel better. They really took what Don Cherry was saying out of context. They took what he was saying out of context to pull the worst possible meaning, which was that he was anti-immigrant, and that he was specifically, when he said, you people, why aren't you wearing the poppy, that he was talking about immigrants, and not just immigrants. Apparently, some people took it even further, that he was talking about people who don't have white skin, that he was just talking to everyone in Canada who doesn't have white skin. And so, you see this, it's like CBC. The notion that Canada's veterans were all white is dangerously wrong and an insult to thousands, says Peter Mansbridge. What do you mean? The notion that Canada's veterans were all white? Who said that other than the CBC and other than Peter Mansbridge? Literally, they're just replying to themselves, or making up a narrative of what happened, and then replying to that instead of looking at, what actually happened and replying to that. So Peter Mansbridge has this op-ed that's supposedly refuting Don Cherry. Look, it's Remembrance Day. Today is the day that we should be focusing on the people who have made the ultimate sacrifice to provide us with a free society. And instead, we see a cherished national icon be removed from his position because of basically a mob, the outrage mob that you see online. It's sad, it's pathetic. And, I think that Don Cherry deserves better by Canadians. I think Canadians deserve better by their own mainstream media and the sort of elitist crew in downtown Toronto who makes the rules and believes that literally we all have to think the same. We all have to have the exact same opinion. We all have to think exactly the same. No one can raise any difference of opinion. It isn't really about what Don Cherry said. It was the reaction. It was just so over the top. And to see, you have a CTV article, what people think about Don Cherry and his comments is scolding immigrants who don't wear poppies. Again, they find the biggest virtue signals on social media to pretend that all Canadians are somehow united against Don Cherry, and somehow that Don Cherry said something wrong. Well, I've watched the video over and over again. I will say, when Don Cherry speaks, I'm not always 100% sure what he's saying. He's a little bit incoherent. He rambles, and so you kind of have to just, pull what you can from what he's saying, and you have to assume that his heart's in the good place. I do anyway. I've been watching the guy on TV for 2 decades, and you have to assume that his heart's in the right place. If you don't, like most of the mainstream media apparently, and all the people who've demanded that he's been fired, they assume that his heart's in the bad place. Well, that's their bad faith interpretation. I think Don Cherry's a good guy, and instead of just assuming that what he said was wrong, you should let him explain it for himself. Again, read the transcript of what he said, go watch it again. It isn't entirely clear what he's talking about, and even if he was talking about immigrants, fine, that might be a little bit politically incorrect, but I think it's still fair comment to say, hey, if you come to Canada 1 day a year, show your respect, wear a poppy, realize that, we live in an incredibly wonderful free society because of the sacrifices that so many before us have made. That's not an anti-immigrant comment. That's not a racist comment. That's not saying that all veterans are white, as Peter Mansbridge apparently thinks that that's what Don Cherry was saying. And again, if we're going to live in a society together, we shouldn't invent what the other side is saying. We should look at these things in good faith. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm super disappointed in my country today. I think the state of free speech in Canada is at a pretty low point. All the more reason why we need independent journalism. We have a petition over at True North, tnc.news. Go sign it. I support Don Cherry. We're gonna do something for Don Cherry. I feel awful the fact that he's been fired, and especially on Remembrance Day. I think that, you know, we should do something for Don. Maybe we can get him to do an interview. Maybe we can get him on True North. Maybe we can hold some kind of a rally in support of Don Cherry. If you have any ideas, any suggestions, just leave a message, leave a comment. What do you think we should do for Don Cherry to show him that so many Canadians support him and are behind him right now? And again, we should be focused today on the veterans who sacrifice for freedom, not on this cancel culture, politically correct mob that's going after Don Cherry. All right, guys, leave it at that. Thanks so much for tuning in. Don't forget to share this video and head on over to tnc.news to sign that petition. Thank you.